Hi, I'm Brant Cooper, author of the New York Times Bestseller, The Lean Entrepreneur, CEO and co-founder of Moves the Needle. So I'm at USB Ed's We Read For You today, presenting on my book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development. This book was the first book that talked about lean startup, customer development, product market fit, and pirate metrics and those sort of things, helping entrepreneurs getting their startups off the ground. So during one of the post.com bust, I was the interim VP of marketing for a startup. And I sort of had already been thinking about, maybe we should structure startups and teach startups how to act differently than big businesses. Up to that point, we very quickly tried to get startups to look like big businesses. And yet there was a bunch of people writing and thinking and talking about, well, maybe we shouldn't do it that way. Maybe the successful startups are ones that actually don't try to emulate what a big company looks like. So somebody turned me on to Steve Blank because I was blogging about this, and Eric Ries was just starting blogging, and we took all of these concepts, and there was a small group of us hanging out on Google Groups talking about how to implement this, and all just starts taking off, right? So I was in the right place at the right time, wrote this first book, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, trying to bring all of these concepts that a bunch of different people were talking about and bringing them together in a way that startups could use them. The irony, I guess, is we started off, how do we not build startups to make them look like big companies? And now we're working inside the big companies and trying to bring some of that entrepreneurial spirit back into the large enterprises. But so fundamentally what we're talking about is, what is the way that we can understand what the business model is that actually works? It's great to have a plan. I don't know if you make your students here write plans, business plans. Business plans out in the startup world are 10-slide pitch decks. But it's important actually for people to think through what they think is true. But what we want to know is that, or understand, is that that plan is going to change. My method really is to sort of draw out your ecosystem. What are all of the players that need to be inside of around your company? So that could be partners, it could be how you're going to go to market, so the channel, it can be customers, obviously, it could be a variety of different players in there. So Jeffrey Moore in Crossing the Chasm talks about the whole product. And so your product actually inside of your startup might only be one component needed to solve the bigger problem. And so eventually you're going to have to get to the point of describing that whole bit. And then what you have to do is understand what is the value proposition for each one of those. So all of those people are going to have their own motivations to participate in that ecosystem. So inside of a traditional business plan, we understand that it's actually full of assumptions, what we think is going to happen. But the interesting thing is what I find difficult for entrepreneurs and students is coming up with what that value proposition is. And the concept even that what you have to do is think through what is the value proposition for all of these different players here. So you might write inside of your partners box on the business model canvas that, yep, these are the partners that I'm going to need. But in order to attract those partners, you actually have to do empathy work and run experiments and actually try to get the value proposition right for them. Here I'm trying to, in assessing the risk, we're trying to figure out which ones are needed at the very beginning. So obviously customers are probably a pretty high priority. And however you're going to build the product, whether you're going to build that internally, whether you need any external technology. We all understand the concept of a minimum viable product. The minimum features for the product to be viable. You don't really have to, there's a bunch of people that are inventing all these other things like minimum desirable product and all of these other ways. Viable actually includes all of those. If the product's not desirable, it's not viable. Eric Ries writes in his book that all of those experiments that you can run, like the concierge test and the Wizard of Oz test, are MVPs. I like to differentiate, especially with corporates. They actually like to differentiate between, here are the experiments that you're running, and then your MVP is actually the product. It's the minimum first version of that product that you're testing to see if it's going to be viable. So this is the Value Stream Discovery Board, is actually from my second book, The Lean Entrepreneur. And I wanted to throw it in here because to me this is a better way to evaluate the value propositions of all these different entities. And so I wanted to give sort of an update here in the middle of this presentation. So the value stream discusses 7 states that a customer or potentially a vendor or a partner, or if you're in the medical field, you might have payers and healthcare providers. So all of these different people that might play in the ecosystem, they go through 7 states from becoming first aware of your product or company until they become passionate. And you could break those down and run experiments on each stage of those phases. What must I do as a business in order to get the customer to behave in a particular way that indicates that they're at one of those states? And so the idea is to create a funnel that you can track each state, and you can look at the data and understand where you need to optimize in order to grow your company. So I sort of call this middle part is the diamond nugget of the value stream: intrigued, satisfied, and passionate. We were trying to coin the term at this point, minimum viable test instead of a minimum viable product, so that all of those experiments, like the landing page experiment where you put up a one-page website with your value proposition on it, you share that landing page to your target audience. You've got a big call to action on there, with the buy now or whatever, and you're measuring whether people click on it. It doesn't mean that those people will end up being customers for sure and you run off and build the product now. But if you can't get anybody to click on it, then you might think that there's a problem, right? But it really is a hypothesis. Experiments is not just throwing things against the wall. It's not just trying things. It's if we do X, Y percentage of our customers will behave in way Z, and way Z validates the assumption. Typical process: go out to your customer, ask them what they want. They give you a laundry list of features. Product manager goes back to the company, sits down with the engineering team. They argue about which features are going to be built. They come up with a specification. Then you ask those engineers to come up with estimates that everybody knows are wrong. Calendar, so that time estimates of when it's going to take to build all of that stuff. Launch date is determined by this haggling between product management and engineering. And so then that's when the product's done. Product is never done, actually. But a particular version of a product is done when the customer says it's done. If the pain is big enough for the customer and you've solved that pain, they want it now. You can still go and improve it. That'll be in version 2, right? So you could do, design thinking is very popular, and so they do, have popularized really the empathy work even better than all this customer development stuff. I actually think more around design thinking now than I do sort of traditional customer development, even though I was the cust dev guy. And so design thinking and lean startup are this really nice match, because right when you get into the prototyping phase in design thinking, lean startup actually does that a little bit better because there's more disciplined about what you're doing with that prototype. So you could do prototyping, wireframing, get a letter of intent. It's not legally binding, but if somebody signs their name on a letterhead, that typically they're going to feel like they're held to it. And fundamentally what I try to teach is if you get these principles, if you get the core principles, you're sort of good to go. You don't really have to follow somebody else's methodology or some other tool. Understand where your assumptions are. Understand which ones are risky. The way we teach this nowadays is brainstorm your assumptions, and then you're going to prioritize them based upon known versus unknown. And it's known in the market. And then we're also vertically, we're prioritizing them based upon how critical they are. So are other assumptions dependent upon them? Almost always for startups, the riskiest assumption is, does anybody care about my product? Does anybody care about the problem that I'm trying to solve? And so by prioritizing in that way, you get sort of in this upper right quadrant all of the most important, the riskiest assumptions that you need to test. You can't execute through uncertainty. That's like just taking one chance in this big unknown, and you're going to fail. So it's this balance all across the organization, all across the startup. As they learn, they have to balance into this execution mode. And the big company, it's all across the company based upon these time horizons, how much uncertainty they faced. And they need to learn how to act differently inside of that uncertainty. And the way you do it, Expose your assumptions, run experiments to test them. Answers are with your customer. You just can't ask them for the answers. That's the crazy thing. So when you're actually on the execution mode and you're interacting with your customers understand the market too. So you can kind of believe what they say. If you're over here in the learning mode and you ask your customers, they have no idea. And so that's where the design thinking really comes in and does a great job, I think, is that it's really about the empathy. It's about understanding why they say what they say. It's about understanding their aspirations. Early on, in my opinion, a lot of the customer development was really around going and interviewing your customers. And we would try to help people do good interviews. But entrepreneurs tend to pitch their ideas and then go, do you like my idea? Or they ask them, well, will you buy this? So you can't ask a customer to predict their own future. That's why you run experiments, because we're trying to get them to behave in a way that indicates that they want the value that we're providing. So some of the things that we were thinking about back then, I guess I like the status quo coefficient. So you think you're solving a problem, the customer has the problem, but they're actually like, yeah, your technology's better, but why should I change? We're trying to get people to change their behavior. It's really hard to do. So I tried to break down for entrepreneurs a little bit, what are those human beings worried about inside? You know, if you could become a hero because you've increased market share or, you know, massively improved revenue. The people want promotion, job security, they want a bigger budget. So the business, this stuff is good, you have to have it, but this is the human element to it, and you have to consider it, and you have to do the empathy work to understand that. So some of the things that we try to get the entrepreneurs' juices flowing, here are some things that you need to learn about your consumers, pains and passions, who influences them. Is it their spouse? Is it their children even? So how do you learn about all this stuff? Where can you find them? Common question from entrepreneurs, oh, how do I go find these customers? They actually want to sit in the building. Now, you've heard the term growth hacking. Growth hacking is using technical abilities to do your online marketing. So just in the same way that engineers don't really want to go talk to customers, now marketing people don't want to go talk to customers. They just want to no, I'm going to code up a landing page. The problem about doing it, automating it before you do it in person is that you don't know what you're automating. Marketing should be automating what you've learned by doing it in person. It's amazing, I've been talking about this lean startup, or a bunch of us have been talking about this lean startup stuff for a decade, and I still meet all of these entrepreneurs. Oh yeah, you know, I spent the last 2 years building this platform, and I don't have any customers. What should I do? Have you talked to anybody? What? In the same way that I talked about, if you just understand those core principles, you win. The other characteristic is it's the people who hustle that win. It's the people that, you know, are willing to go talk to dozens, hundreds of customers. Yeah, so at bottom line, that sounds like that's a slide towards the end. So you don't do all of this stuff just for the sake of doing it. So again, I don't really care if people call their stuff customer development or design thinking or lean startup or lean this or whatever. We're really interested in helping entrepreneurs and large companies that are trying to create value in the world, and how can they get their value out. And so it's really iterating on that value that's going to be able to find what it takes to do that. And then you can use the same principles all across that business model. So if you think of Oswater's business model canvas, or you think of just the way I was mapping the ecosystem, you have to test that all across all of those different players in there in order to figure out what's going to work to scale the company. Okay, thank you very much.